Hello, I'm Jasmine, the co-founder of Uncharted Coffee, and today we are introducing an experiment, which is us starting our very first sister podcast. We have wanted to start a podcast for so long, since this brand was an idea. And so here we are today. And the purpose of this is really to just have a conversation between sisters. So with that being said, I'll introduce my sister.
Hey everyone, I'm Danielle. It's great to see you. One of the things that's been interesting with Jasmine and I since we started Uncharted is so many people have told us that part of what they have always appreciated about us as sisters is just the chance to get to know us. Like people will say, "Hey, we want to hang out with you, we want to travel with you." And so this is our attempt to sort of peel back the layers, if you will, and invite people into just a conversation with us as sisters. And so I thought it would be super casual. We'd start by maybe sharing a little bit about, for some of you might be new to following Uncharted, but even a reminder if you've been along us with the journey is like, why did we start Uncharted to begin with? Like, what was the impetus for it? So maybe Jasmine, you can kick us off.
Yeah, thank you. I thought first, one thing that we don't share enough. So, full disclosure, Danielle is my sister, and we both do not love being on camera. So, this is a little bit
Very true. Extremely
uncomfortable for
uncomfortable.
us both. So, bear with us. But as she mentioned, we did hear your feedback, and people are always very curious to just learn more about who we are, how we got here, and share our story. And so, part of this journey with Uncharted is just like the name. All of this is uncharted and we're learning and exploring. And so, with that being said, we just ask that you are patient with us, but we are really looking forward to using this as an opportunity to bring you into the conversation, to learn more about us, what we're creating, how we have changed and grown, but more importantly, what it means to us as sisters. So, I thought it'd be helpful to share a little bit of background about me. So, I'm Jasmine. Pronouns she, her, have spent the last 15 years of my career in marketing, building brands across consumer tech, biotech, pharma, healthcare, and most recently, consumer goods. I am very passionate about Uncharted because it's really a great way to connect people to each other. We started this brand, as many of you know or may not know, inspired by our late mother, who always believed that coffee was a connector, and we kind of grew up seeing her at the breakfast table, inviting friends, family, neighbors to just have like a safe third space. And so we wanted to kind of reintroduce those values or those behaviors that we saw growing up. And so, as sisters, one thing we used to always do together is take an annual sister trip. We had been doing that for about 10 years. And what we noticed is in that moment, we didn't, I guess, see it, but as we reflected back, that every time we would go and experience a new place, we always were on the quest to find the best coffee in town.
So true.
And we were like, wow, after we started to reflect on it, we were like, there's something here. And it all came full circle because we remembered that coffee was something that connected us to our mother. And not only that, but coffee is just something that forces us all to slow down, have a conversation, appreciate each other. And one thing that I always like to say is coffee, we can all remember something meaningful that happened in our lives because of coffee. It could have been that first job interview. It could have been that first date that turned into a marriage or even a breakup. But we can all remember something like really significant in our lives that happened because of coffee. And so instead of just grabbing our coffee, rushing to start the day, running to our desk to get at our computer and jump on a Zoom call for work, I think it's important to pause and reflect just as adults as we navigate and move through life. Adulting is hard, and using coffee is just kind of like that grounding point to keep us um, reminded of like the importance of slowing down and making time for the things that we care about and the people we care about.
Absolutely. So I guess I'll share a little bit about me, for those of you who don't know. So I am Jasmine's little sister. Fun fact, there's actually a total of four of us. So I'm the youngest of four girls. Yes, everyone likes to tell me I'm the baby. My career is always funny and interesting when I describe it to people. I've had this sort of weird trajectory of journalist turned communicator, now turn corporate philanthropist. But the thread I always try to tie for people is that from a very young age, one of the things that I took away from both of our parents, our mom was a teacher, and our dad spent most of his life in the military. And so service has been like very fundamental to my core from a very young age. And I always wanted to do something that was bigger than myself. I started off by doing that through writing. People who have known me for a long time know that I've always been a writer and I write poetry and all those kinds of things. And so journalism was kind of my initial pathway into purpose-driven work and then communications and helping to tell stories about companies. And then finally, I decided I just want to do full-time work that thinks about how to change the world and make things better, and started to work in corporate philanthropy. And have mostly worked in health philanthropy with different organizations that are looking for ways to take capital from the business and give it back into community to improve health outcomes for people. So that's something that I really enjoyed doing. And as Jasmine mentioned, we both sort of come into Uncharted from different aspects. Certainly, Jasmine is the marketer, and I'm the one that's thinking about, how do we do something that's purposeful and that's good and that helps people, planet, holistically. One thing that we talked a lot really early on with Uncharted, and especially as we were spending time like traveling and learning about coffee and trying to explore, is like it's so important to understand like where the bean actually comes from. It's so important to make sure the people that are cultivating the bean, the people throughout the supply chain process, that we are paying them equitably. Equity is such a core value when we think about Uncharted. And so it's always been about like this larger vision and really movement into trying to get people to decolonize coffee by understanding that so much of coffee comes from people working really hard out in fields. It's not very easy to go up into big fields and pick a coffee cherry and to get the coffee bean out of the cherry. It's such a labor intensive process. And we want people to understand that and appreciate just that whole aspect of it. And so part of what I spend a lot of time thinking about in Uncharted is like, what's our sourcing criteria? How are we making sure that we're sourcing beans responsibly and that they're not causing harm to the environment? And then also thinking about the people that we interact and that they're really reflective of the brand and what stands out to us. Something that we've been thinking about recently too, just with our mission, there's so many words and there's so many things described in the space of coffee. There's organic, there's fair trade, there's so many different terminologies. And as we've been on this path and learning as roasters in the coffee space and importers, what does all these different terminologies really mean? And we wanted to make sure that we brought people true, clean, chemical-free coffee. And like I said, that's not harmful to planet. And that's led us to our most recent kind of reshaping of the brand, and that we want to be regenerative first as a company. And I'll let Jasmine talk a little bit more about what that means and sort of what led us here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Danielle said and shared a lot and kind of unpacked a lot there, but I wanted to take a step back because it'll bring us forward as we think about regenerative first and like what that means. So Danielle and I are together today on a sister trip. And this year really marks the 10-year anniversary of our sister trip. And so I thought before we jump into regenerative first and what it means, really kind of talking a little bit and sharing about our first sister trip, why it's important, where we are today in our lives, and why we're trying to introduce that as part of how the brand evolves and moves forward. So, I guess to give you all some background, we talked about sister trips and the importance of sisterhood. I think you all can probably tell that Danielle and I are like super close. And one thing that and coffee has definitely been part of helping to build that closeness together. But I think one thing that's been really helpful for us to just like build our bond as siblings, because we were not always this close. When we were kids growing up, we definitely were like fighting each other, kicking, pushing each other
She
downstairs.
certainly never wanted to play with me and my toys.
Not completely true.
Yes, it
But
is. I'm sure siblings have selective memories.
Yeah, that's kind of true. But our first trip together was actually a trip to Ireland, right?
Mhm.
Okay, no,
First international trip. Certainly, we took lots of domestic trips.
we took lots of domestic trips, but
Yes.
our first international trip together, which I think was a bigger one, was us going to Ireland together. And we took this like overnight red-eye flight from Chicago, which is our hometown, and landed in Dublin. And we thought it was a
At
great
5 a.m.
We landed at 5 a.m.
Not good planning on our part.
Not good planning. We arrived at the hotel. When we arrived in Dublin, nothing was open. It was still dark because it was winter. We went on like a post-Christmas to New Year trip. And it was still dark and everything was closed. And we were like, what are we going to do? And we arrived at our hotel and they were so nice and gracious. And they gave us our room early and allowed us to come in and like sleep, unpack, which was really great after our first like long haul flight arriving overnight. So that was great.
And then we slept in the whole day because we were so jet lagged.
We were
We
so
weren't
jet
used to it.
We weren't used to it. But I say all that to say it kind of was like the springboard and the kickoff to like us doing this like time together, which allowed us to, I think for me, it's always a good reset when I have time with my sister. You know, she's a good grounding force. She reminds me to like appreciate the small things that sometimes I forget because I get stuck in the grind of like life. And so every time I'm with her, it's a good time. For me, it's a good opportunity to like distract and disconnect from like all of the things that I don't know, it could just be a lot to manage in the day to day. So it's an opportunity for us to ground ourselves, to catch up, to talk. And in some ways, it's been fun to get to know her in a deeper way. And I think we all feel this way. Like when you have uninterrupted time with your family, with your friends, it's really an opportunity to have like deeper, better, richer conversations. And so it's just nice to do that when you are not like in your day to day, right? Like if I'm at home, if I'm in my neighborhood, we have a weekend together or whatever, I'm probably going to do a load of laundry or go run errands. But when I'm kind of like removed from my day to day environment, it allows me to focus more on those people. And so that's what those trips became for us. And so they started out as like once a year, then they became like more than once a year. But I say all that to say it was really a good opportunity to learn more about like who she is and to like watch her grow from this like young adult into like this woman that she is now. So our sister trips have been like one of my favorite things. And I see that come forward into Uncharted. And when Danielle talks about regenerative first and how we're evolving and thinking about the brand, something that we've really been reflecting on is you know, what does uncharted really mean to us? I think a lot of brands, as Danielle mentioned, love to like greenwash and use all of these like marketing terms, but what does it really mean? How are you really driving change? And one thing that we both agree on, as Danielle mentioned, is like how can we do work that's more purposeful and that gives back in a meaningful way? And regenerative is really the best way that I've seen or that we've seen within agriculture that truly is transformative. And so, we'll get a lot of questions around like, are you guys fair trade? What does fair trade mean? And fair trade is great, but a lot of people don't know that when you buy fair trade is just a certification, right? Like companies pay once a year to like a very large fee, by the way. So I don't want to diminish the certification and requirement for those things. But the producer who's still developing the raw materials, fruits, vegetables, etc., whatever, they still get paid pennies on the dollar. So in most cases, fair trade does not pay a living wage. Now, when you buy things directly from small producers, it's better. You can pay them more, you can offer them more, and there are importers that are definitely trying to do that. But regenerative is really a different way to think about how we coexist as people with our partners in this little tiny place called Earth, whether it's like birds, mammals, animals, etc. And so the idea of regenerative agriculture really is this commitment to kind of this like go forward movement, that we're using, which is like a commitment to not only care about what goes in the body of our customers from like a quality perspective, as Danielle mentioned, but to care about future generations and like what our impact is on the environment. Coffee can be very water consuming, as Danielle mentioned, it's very labor intensive, so it just it's one of those things that can take a lot away from the environment. And so regenerative really restores ecosystems. So if I could give you like the quick summary, not to be like boring and educate you with all the scientific drama. But essentially, what has happened is, the way that we farm in most places, but I'll speak more specifically to the US, is we've kind of like over farmed a lot of our soil, and it's not nutritionally dense, and in a lot of cases, it's not good for us. And so, we use a lot of chemicals to obviously like stimulate that, help it grow, make sure we have enough food to supply throughout the country. And the challenge with that is because we've turned those crops over so frequently, they just don't have a lot of nutritional value. So that tomato, today doesn't have the same nutritional value as like a tomato from 50 years ago because we've just overused that land. What regenerative does is kind of a mixed crop approach. So it's not monolithic. So you don't just plant like one group, one plot of tomatoes for like miles. You kind of mix and intermingle things that are complementary. The good thing about that and what's really cool is it allows one, it's kind of like think about when you make like a soup, right? Like you put all these things together and they kind of stew and they taste good. And if you just make like a tomato soup, it's okay. But if you make like tomato basil or you kind of have these things that complement each other, that's kind of what regenerative is. You can plant these crops next to each other that kind of have like a complementary effect, but more importantly, they complement the soil. They allow the soil to restore. They allow bees to pollinate. They allow things to grow in some places they have not grown in years. And it takes the soil from being overly used and really dry and kind of barren to restorative and regenerative and nutritious. And so all of these things. And so it creates one better ecosystem for like animals, birds, everyone who like is consuming off the land in its raw form. But then when we harvest, it's a better quality product for us because there's so much care and love and nourishment. No chemicals are being used. It's all natural composting, fertilizer, etc. What goes into our bodies from a organic perspective, organic matter, is just better. So you get a coffee that has a more clean flavor. It's more balanced. Typically, you're not going to get like jitters or like upset stomach, lower in acid, all of those things.
Right.
But more importantly, regenerative, which is certified by two organizations, Regenified and another, pays far more than fair trade value for materials. And you can find regenerative dairy, coffee is obviously one of them. This is a new practice, and we're starting to see more of this percolate, I guess is the best way to describe it, because it's new and we're all learning, but it'll make our food ecosystem better for the long term. And that's one thing that's really important to me is, I do worry and think about food scarcity and food safety for obviously like local people in my community, but then also as Americans, as a global citizen, like what does that mean for people to have access to healthy, affordable food? And so regenerative is kind of the first step to like fix the damage that's been done over the last like 60, 70 years.
Jasmine said a lot there.
So much. I feel like regenerative, it's like a big topic. It's a lot to unpack.
It is a lot. It is a lot.
And I'm not a regenerative expert. I continue to learn on this every day. So please don't like slide in my DMs with a lot of like negative juju because I'm still learning.
It's so funny to like when you do podcasts and these conversations with other people because I was listening to her talk about me and it's like, oh, I gotta do these more often so I can hear her say great things about me. But I think Jasmine's right. Regenerative is really it's going to be the way to really restore our food chain, which is something that we both deeply care about. I mentioned that I've been spending a lot of my time in health philanthropy, and health is just something so important to Jasmine and I. In fact, even our like practice and ritual of coffee really started because we both realized that so much of life was so busy and stressful and chaotic that we felt like we could create a coffee brand that really was about taking that time to establish those rituals to slow down, even though coffee, gives us all a little bit of an energy boost. But for Jasmine and I, when we share a cup of coffee, either together or separately in our own like time at home, it's really that way to kind of recenter and to establish a ritual. And that I would say is another important aspect of Uncharted and sort of an extension of us with the brand is that when we take time to sip and have coffee together, we're not rushing it. We're talking about our day. We're talking about, things that concern us like the planet and everything that's going on. But we're also just, talking about life. When's the next trip that we want to take or what's like stressing us out overall. And it's important to just like have those little meaningful rituals. And coffee is just one way we found to do that. Even in our travels, we would always go and like look for a coffee shop, like a place where we could get a little bit of the vibe of like the locals, see people, if we're international, like, where's the like all the locals going for coffee? And it was interesting because being from the US, as we would travel, our habit was to take our coffee to go. And a lot of times in other countries, we noticed that people were actually taking the time to like sit down and have conversation. And that's when it really hit us that coffee was not meant to be this like rushed, hurried experience, but it should be a time when you sit down, you have conversation with people that you care about, or you slow down, you read, read a book. You don't necessarily use your phone, but just maybe something else to just deconnect. And so it's really important for us when we think about Uncharted as a brand and what we want it to be as an extension of us, that it's helpful to try to restore our agriculture, but also to encourage people to think about their own wellness habits and to take time to connect with themselves as well as other people in their lives, the way that Jasmine and I connect over a cup of coffee. We each have our own different coffee favorite beverages. Lately, I would say, choice beverage has been a classic Americano. It's your go-to coffee beverage.
I bought an espresso machine a few years ago. Highly recommend that you guys do it. Number one, it saves you like the average cost of a latte in the US right now is like $7 to $10, which is a lot. And I can make me a little espresso at home with my Uncharted coffee beans for like 22 cents a serving. It's like less than $1. And I get to choose my milk and choose my syrup and all of those things. But to answer
It's very
your
particular
I'm
about her
very
milk.
particular about my milk. But because we talked about this, about wellness, I care about what goes into my body. So I don't use any milks. First of all, I don't drink milk by itself. So I always have like a non-dairy alternative. But I don't want to have any guar gums, any oils, all of those things. But my favorite drink that I'm drinking right now is a flat white. That was a long, long answer to a short question, but flat white.
That was a very long answer. I think that probably wraps like our first episode. We don't want to have you all just listening to us forever, but we thought we'd roll these out, give you all a chance to learn a little about us, learn a little about Uncharted. Sometimes we might talk about Uncharted, sometimes we might talk about random things, our latest trip, or maybe the latest trip that we want to go on that we haven't planned yet. So we hope you'll enjoy these. We hope that you'll give us feedback. Let us know what else you want to hear.
All right, sounds good. Thanks all.